Imagine discovering an ancient document that describes in great detail a person who changed the course of history. This person is Jesus Christ, and the document's author is Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who played a key role in the events leading to Jesus' crucifixion. Little is known about Pilate's personal opinion of Jesus, but a letter said to be written by him to Emperor Tiberius gives us a rare and intriguing perspective. This letter goes beyond what is written in the Gospels, describing Jesus' physical appearance, emotional impact, and even a sense of the supernatural surrounding him. This letter raises interesting questions. How did Pilate describe Jesus' looks? Did he see Jesus as just an ordinary man or something more profound? And why aren't these vivid details more widely known? What follows is a captivating story that not only tells us about events from that time but also reflects on the deep spiritual and historical impact of Jesus. In this exploration, we will look at the historical context of the letter, Pilate's description of Jesus' appearance, and the extraordinary events Pilate witnessed. This story challenges traditional portrayals of Jesus and invites us to think about his significance both spiritually and historically. If such topics interest you, consider staying connected as we explore history, spirituality, and mysteries with respect and dedication to our audience. Pontius Pilate is a historical figure often seen as both mysterious and controversial. As the Roman governor of Judea from 26 to 36 AD, Pilate acted as the empire's main representative in the region. He had authority over civil, criminal, and religious matters. His role was complicated, as governing Judea meant managing constant tensions between Roman control and the Jewish people's desire for independence, deeply rooted in their religious and cultural traditions. Under Roman rule, Judea was both important and challenging. Its location in the Middle East made it a key route for trade and military movements, but the Jewish people's monotheistic beliefs and refusal to worship the emperor as a god often led to conflicts with Roman policies. Pilate had the difficult job of maintaining loyalty to Rome while avoiding local uprisings, a delicate balance with serious political consequences. Pilate's methods of governance were often harsh, even brutal, which was typical for that time. It was in this tense setting that Jesus of Nazareth appeared, a charismatic teacher whose messages attracted large crowds. To the religious leaders, Jesus was a threat not only to their authority but also to the fragile cooperation they had with Rome. When Jesus was brought before Pilate, the governor found himself in a situation far more significant than any routine administrative matter. According to some traditions, Pilate wrote a letter to Emperor Tiberius to report on these extraordinary events. News about Jesus was spreading rapidly, and Pilate felt it was important to inform Rome about the implications of this unusual case. This letter provides not just details about Jesus but also insight into the political, religious, and cultural tensions of the time. Pilate wasn't trying to glorify Jesus in his letter. Instead, he was acting as a responsible administrator, trying to protect his position and explain his decisions to the emperor. Yet, as we read this account, we are struck by how Pilate described Jesus' appearance and presence. To Pilate, Jesus was no ordinary man. He seemed to possess an aura that went beyond the physical world. The letter includes striking details. Jesus had long, wavy hair that gently rested on his shoulders, described as light brown with a shine that seemed to change in different light, giving him an almost otherworldly look. His eyes were especially captivating, penetrating and expressive, ranging in color from light brown to deep blue. Pilate noted that Jesus' gaze felt as if he could see into people's souls, offering calm and reassurance. Pilate also described Jesus' skin as fair, healthy, and glowing, which made him stand out among the crowd. His face had perfect symmetry with well-defined features, radiating a sense of balance and calm. However, it wasn't just his physical appearance that drew attention. Pilate mentioned a kind of inner light in Jesus, an indescribable presence filled with compassion and wisdom. This portrayal contrasts with many traditional images of Jesus, which often show him with European features or styles far removed from the descriptions of his time. Pilate's letter doesn't try to idealize Jesus but instead offers a depiction that feels both real and extraordinary. Pilate also showed respect, possibly even admiration, for Jesus. He described Jesus as someone who commanded authority without arrogance and who brought peace even in the most tense moments. Jesus' strength didn't come from physical power or political influence but from his character and presence, visible in every action and word. The letter reveals that Pilate saw Jesus as a man whose presence left a deep impression on everyone. Pilate noted something about Jesus that was beyond human understanding, a calmness and wisdom that seemed timeless. When Pilate interacted with Jesus, he described a mix of respect, admiration, and curiosity, comparing Jesus to great thinkers like Socrates and Plato. However, Jesus was different. His authority didn't come from logic or debate but from a genuine connection with people. The familiar image of Jesus with a serene expression and Eurocentric features might not align with historical reality. Archaeological discoveries and ancient texts suggest contradictions. Was Jesus really as we've been taught to imagine him? If this letter from Pontius Pilate, the man who sentenced Jesus to death, is genuine, it might hold secrets that challenge everything we think we know. Pilate's letter, written to Emperor Tiberius, is not just a political report, it is a first-hand account that dives into Jesus' identity, his teachings, and the influence he wielded. Could this document provide a clear picture of his true appearance and role in history? Pilate begins by describing Judea as a region on the edge of rebellion. Political tensions ran high, but what made it unique was its deep spiritual fervor. He portrays Jerusalem as a place where every decision carried the risk of igniting chaos. Then comes a question worth asking: who really held the power? Pilate paints the high priests as more than religious leaders. He describes them as cunning manipulators, arrogant yet fearful, balancing control over the masses while negotiating with Rome. Pilate viewed them with suspicion, sensing they feared losing their influence under his rule. In the midst of this, murmurs about Jesus of Nazareth began to reach Pilate. At first, he dismissed the rumors as mere noise about another preacher. But soon, Jesus caught his attention. Why? Because, unlike others, Jesus was reportedly sympathetic to Romans, a rare stance in a region deeply hostile to Roman authority. This led Pilate to act. He sent agents to investigate Jesus. Who was this man? Was he a political threat or something entirely different? As Pilate dug deeper, he began to unravel the mystery of a figure who had captivated the people and unnerved the high priests. What Pilate heard back about Jesus was far from what he expected. This was no typical troublemaker stirring up rebellion. Instead, Pilate's agents described a man whose teachings focused on love, humility, and a kingdom that was not of this world. Jesus wasn't rallying people for insurrection, he was talking about inner transformation and a profound understanding of authority. This unexpected portrayal piqued Pilate's curiosity. What kind of man could inspire both reverence and fear without lifting a sword or raising his voice? Pilate's interest turned personal. He decided he needed to see this enigmatic figure for himself, a decision that would mark a turning point in his life and governorship. The first time Pilate saw Jesus, he was taken aback. Here was a man who appeared unimposing, even humble, yet his presence commanded attention and respect. Pilate's account hints at his surprise, even confusion. How could someone so seemingly gentle spark so much hysteria? This initial encounter began a complicated relationship between Pilate and Jesus, one that went beyond politics or rebellion. In his letter, Pilate described Jesus as having an aura that was difficult to ignore. His teachings didn't challenge Roman rule directly but instead offered a vision of peace, compassion, and personal transformation. This approach made Jesus stand out even among the most unconventional preachers. As unrest in Jerusalem continued to simmer, Pilate received more reports about Jesus. Roman informants and local officers noted his growing influence. But instead of fiery speeches or calls for revolt, Jesus used parables to convey profound truths. Pilate found it intriguing that Jesus's following wasn't limited to any one group. Commoners, Roman sympathizers, and even some Jewish elites listened to him. What kind of teacher could cross such rigid societal lines in a divided city like Jerusalem? Pilate wanted answers. He ordered his aides to gather more detailed accounts and even had his secretary transcribe Jesus's teachings. The reports painted a picture of a man who spoke with calm authority and magnetic presence. When Pilate finally saw Jesus speaking to a crowd near the Roman garrison, he was struck by both his demeanor and his physical presence. Pilate's letter describes Jesus as having fair skin, long hair that framed his face, and an expression that was both humble and commanding. Yet, it wasn't just his appearance that left an impression, it was his voice. Jesus spoke softly, without the fiery tone typical of agitators, yet every person in the crowd seemed captivated by his words. Pilate observed how Jesus's messages of love, forgiveness, and humility resonated deeply. Even Pilate's own aides seemed taken by the preacher, which unsettled Pilate more than he cared to admit. As Pilate sought to understand Jesus further, he realized the challenge before him. Jesus didn't fit the mold of a revolutionary, but his growing influence unnerved the high priests, who saw him as a threat to their authority. Pilate was now caught in a delicate situation. Should he intervene and risk unnecessary conflict or let things unfold naturally, knowing the religious leaders were growing increasingly hostile? Ultimately, Pilate decided on a bold step, to arrange a private meeting with Jesus. This encounter would set in motion a series of events that would alter the course of history forever. When Pilate summoned Jesus to the palace, he wasn't prepared for the profound impact their meeting would have on him. Pilate's letter recounts the moment Jesus arrived, calm, unassuming, and completely devoid of fear. Pilate was struck by the preacher's piercing yet kind eyes, which seemed to hold a quiet confidence that unsettled him. What kind of man stands so composed in the face of Roman power? Pilate began their conversation with standard questions about Jesus's teachings and the swelling crowds that followed him. But instead of political slogans or fiery rhetoric, Jesus spoke of love, human nature, and the transformative power of forgiveness. Pilate found himself drawn into a dialogue that felt more like a philosophical discussion than an interrogation. The tension between Pilate's duty and personal convictions grew when he warned Jesus about the growing hostility among the Jewish leaders led Pilate to urge Jesus to tread carefully, cautioning him against provocative public addresses. Yet Jesus remained unfazed. He thanked Pilate for his concern but showed no fear or hesitation about the dangers ahead. Pilate couldn't shake the unease that came with this response. Was this peace a sign of wisdom or an acceptance of an inevitable fate? As the days passed, the situation in Jerusalem became more volatile. Pilate's efforts to maintain order were met with growing resistance, particularly from the Pharisees and high priests. They viewed Jesus as a direct threat not only to their authority but to the entire religious structure they upheld. Despite their hostility, Jesus continued teaching, drawing even larger crowds each day. Pilate's letter reveals his internal struggle during this time. He saw Jesus as a man of peace, not a revolutionary, yet he couldn't ignore the pressure from the Jewish leaders. Behind the scenes, the high priests were leveraging the threat of rebellion to force Pilate's hand, insinuating that failure to act against Jesus would undermine Pilate's authority in the eyes of Rome. How could Pilate protect an innocent man without jeopardizing his governorship? The tipping point came unexpectedly on the eve of the Passover festival. Pilate was awoken by guards with urgent news: Jesus had been arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, betrayed by one of his own disciples. The high priests wasted no time convening a council and declaring Jesus guilty of blasphemy. Pilate's letter vividly describes the chaotic early hours following Jesus' arrest. The Jewish authorities accused him of claiming to be the Son of God, a charge that was both religiously offensive and politically dangerous. Pilate knew the high priests were seeking a death sentence they couldn't impose themselves. They needed Rome's legal authority to carry it out and were determined to use Pilate to achieve their goal. Would Pilate give in to their demands, or would he risk defying them to save a man he knew was innocent? Pilate's letter reveals a growing suspicion that the high priests were more interested in preserving their own power than in upholding religious purity. They wanted Jesus gone, and Pilate was the key to making it happen. But how could Pilate justify executing an innocent man for blasphemy alone, especially when his instincts told him Jesus was no threat to Roman authority? Was it possible that the entire political system, the religious hierarchy, and even Pilate's own position were being manipulated for the sake of power? Pilate questioned Jesus directly, asking if he claimed to be a king, hoping to find evidence of a political rebellion that would justify Roman intervention. But Jesus's cryptic response, "My kingdom is not of this world," left Pilate more conflicted than ever. Pilate had been expecting a direct political answer, a reason to condemn Jesus, but Jesus's words defied everything Pilate had been trained to recognize as a threat. There was no clear rebellion, no justification for execution, and yet the high priests were relentless in their pursuit. Pilate found himself facing a dilemma. He could not find a rational reason to condemn Jesus, but he was under intense pressure to deliver the result the high priests demanded. What was Pilate supposed to do when the lines between right and wrong became blurred? Feeling trapped, Pilate attempted to shift responsibility by sending Jesus to Herod Antipas, hoping the local ruler might make the decision for him. Pilate's mind raced as he desperately tried to find a way out of the situation, hoping Herod would take charge and release him from the burden. But Herod's mocking treatment of Jesus only returned him to Pilate without a resolution, intensifying Pilate's sense of helplessness. Could Pilate avoid making the decision he dreaded? Could he escape this moment that seemed to demand a choice he could not fully embrace? No. The weight of responsibility was on him, and it was clear that whatever happened, he would be forced to act. Outside, the crowd had gathered, demanding Jesus' death, their voices growing louder as the high priests stirred them into a frenzy. Pilate tried to appeal to the crowd's tradition, offering to release Jesus during Passover as was customary. But the high priests had already manipulated the mob. They didn't want mercy, they wanted Jesus' blood. They demanded the release of Barabbas, a convicted criminal, instead. Pilate's attempt to play to the crowd's sense of justice backfired, and the situation spiraled out of control. Pilate found himself cornered, and the high priests had him right where they wanted him. The religious leaders threatened to report him to Rome, accusing him of disloyalty to the emperor if he released Jesus. The stakes had never been higher, and Pilate's position was now at risk. In one final attempt to satisfy the crowd and avoid outright execution, Pilate ordered Jesus to be scourged, hoping the brutal beating would appease them. He watched as Jesus was publicly beaten, his body bloodied and broken, but the crowd remained unrelenting in their demands for crucifixion. Pilate knew that no matter what he did, nothing short of Jesus' death would quiet the storm. The crowd's bloodlust had reached a fever pitch, and Pilate's options were slipping away one by one. With no way out, Pilate turned to a symbolic gesture, an act that might absolve him in the eyes of the people. He called for a basin of water and, in front of the crowd, washed his hands, declaring, "I am innocent of this man's blood." It was an attempt to absolve himself of responsibility for what he knew was an unjust act. Yet Pilate was keenly aware that this gesture would not undo the guilt he felt for condemning an innocent man to die. Could a simple gesture truly absolve him, or was it just a feeble attempt to clear his conscience? As Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified, his letter describes a deep sense of resignation. The air was thick with tension, the cries of the crowd echoing in his mind as he retreated to his quarters. He tried to block out the sounds, but the knowledge that he had been powerless to stop the inevitable weighed on him heavily. Pilate had done everything within his authority to save Jesus, yet the forces against him were too great, and in the end, the outcome seemed unavoidable. He realized that he had been swept up in a tide of events much larger than he could control. Was this simply about power and politics, or was something much deeper at play? Reflecting on the events, Pilate couldn't shake the feeling that he had been caught in the middle of something far greater than political maneuvering. There was something extraordinary about this man from Nazareth, something Pilate could not fully comprehend. The world seemed to hold its breath after Jesus' execution. According to accounts, the skies darkened unnaturally, and the earth quaked as if creation itself mourned his death. The temple curtain, a symbol of separation between the divine and humanity, was torn in two, as though unseen hands had ripped it apart in protest. Whispers spread quickly through the streets of Jerusalem. Some called it coincidence, others spoke of divine judgment. Could these events really be dismissed as mere natural phenomena, or was the universe bearing witness to something extraordinary? In the days that followed, a strange mix of fear and hope rippled through the people. Jesus' followers scattered, their dreams shattered, yet rumors of an empty tomb began to surface. Could it be true? Had the man who spoke of a kingdom not of this world somehow defied death itself? For those watching the events unfold, one question loomed larger than any other: was this the end of a story, or just the beginning?